The champagne flute trembled in Sienna Cross's manicured fingers as her husband's voice cut through the golden ballroom like a blade through silk. "Pack your bags." The words hung in the air above 300 of Manhattan's elite, suspended between the crystal chandeliers and the collective intake of breath from society's most powerful players. Edward Cross, billionaire empire builder, the man whose name graced hospital wings and university buildings, stood at the marble podium with his steely gray eyes fixed on his wife of 12 years. "You heard me, Sienna." His voice carried the same cold authority he used to crush competitors. "Get out of my house. Tonight." The orchestra had fallen silent. Waiters froze mid-step with their silver trays. Even the diamonds around wealthy necks seemed to dim as every eye in the room shifted between the couple who had once been Manhattan's golden pair. Sienna's heart shattered behind her ribs, each piece falling like broken glass, but her face remained a masterpiece of composure. She had learned long ago that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, not in Edward's world, where weakness was devoured like prey. "She's been lying to you all," Edward continued, his voice gaining momentum like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "To all of us. My own wife, plotting behind my back, trying to destroy everything we've built together." The accusation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Phones discreetly emerged from evening bags. By morning, the footage would be everywhere. Sienna set her champagne down with deliberate care, the crystal singing a soft, mournful note against the marble table. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing against her from all sides. Former friends already calculating the social cost of association, business partners mentally severing ties, rivals barely concealing their satisfaction at watching the mighty fall. But as she looked at Edward, this man she had once loved enough to sacrifice her dreams for, something cold and sharp crystallized in her chest. Not heartbreak. Not anymore. Recognition. She had been preparing for this moment longer than he knew. Every late-night meeting he thought he'd hidden, every whispered phone call, every trail of evidence he'd carelessly left behind. She had been watching, waiting, collecting. Edward expected tears. Expected pleading. Expected her to crumble like all his other victims. Instead, Sienna smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of her lips, but it sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the October wind rattling the windows. "Of course, darling," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Whatever you say." She turned on her heel, her silk gown whispering across the marble as she walked toward the exit with the grace of a queen leaving her own coronation. But as the ballroom doors closed behind her with a soft, final click, one question lingered in the air like expensive perfume. Who, exactly, was about to be destroyed? 3 months earlier, Sienna had been everything Edward Cross wanted in a wife: beautiful, refined, and most importantly, silent. She attended his galas with a practiced smile, managed his household with military precision, and never questioned the late nights or sudden business trips that took him away from their marriage bed. But Sienna Cross had not always been a billionaire's trophy. Before Edward, she had been Sienna Martinez, a forensic accountant with a gift for following money trails that others couldn't see. She had given up her career for love, trading her independence for a life of luxury and loneliness. Now, sitting in her penthouse office 3 blocks from Edward's empire, she remembered why numbers had always made more sense to her than people. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't cheat. They didn't promise forever and then throw you away like yesterday's newspaper when you became inconvenient. "The Cayman accounts show another transfer," her assistant Marcus said as he placed a thick file on her mahogany desk. A former FBI forensic accountant himself, Marcus had been her first hire when she quietly started her consulting firm 6 months ago, a fact Edward knew nothing about. "How much this time?" Sienna asked, not looking up from the photographs scattered across her desk. Images of Edward entering hotels with 3 different women over the past year. His secretary, Rachel. His business partner's daughter, Victoria. And the newest one, a pharmaceutical lobbyist named Diane who had been helping him secure contracts through less than legal means. 15 million. To the same shell company that's been buying up properties in Miami. Sienna's jaw tightened. Those properties had been purchased using funds siphoned from the charity foundation Edward had started in their first year of marriage. The foundation that was supposed to help children in need, not line his pockets for his secret retirement plan. And the SEC investigation? My contact says they're close to filing charges. The pharmaceutical contracts especially. If they can prove he paid bribes to secure the government healthcare deal. 25 years, Sienna finished. Minimum. Marcus nodded grimly. Unless someone else brings them the evidence first. Someone with intimate knowledge of his business practices. Sienna leaned back in her leather chair, studying the New York skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere out there, Edward was probably having lunch with another senator, another judge, another person whose influence he could buy. He thought himself untouchable. He had no idea his wife had been documenting every transaction, every bribe, every illegal deal for the past 18 months. Ever since she'd found the first Swiss bank account statement in his home office, along with photos of him and Rachel tangled in bed sheets at the Ritz. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. He's planning to file for divorce next week. His lawyer called mine. They want to claim adultery on your part. They have photos of you with someone. Sienna's blood ran cold. What photos? Coffee meetings. Dinner. With Alexander Reed. The name hit her like a physical blow. Alex, the investigative journalist who had been helping her understand the legal implications of Edward's crimes. The man whose dark eyes held more warmth than she'd felt in years of marriage. The man who made her remember what it felt like to be seen, really seen, for who she was beneath the designer gowns and perfect facade. They had been careful. So careful. But in Edward's world, careful was never enough. He's going to destroy Alex's career, she whispered. Not if we destroy him first, Marcus said softly. The anniversary gala is in 3 days. If he's planning to humiliate you publicly, then he'll have an audience, Sienna said, her voice growing stronger. An audience of everyone who matters. Everyone who can watch his empire fall in real time. She picked up one of the photographs. Edward kissing Rachel against his office window, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind them like a promise of forever that had never been meant for her. Call Alex, she said. Tell him it's time. Alexander Reed had covered wars, exposed government corruption, and taken down 3 Fortune 500 companies with nothing but his laptop and an unshakable belief in the truth. But sitting across from Sienna Cross in a dimly lit cafe on the Lower East Side, he felt like a teenager with his first crush. You're sure about this? He asked, his fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. Once we publish the story, there's no going back. Edward will come for you with everything he has. Sienna's green eyes held steady on his. He's already destroyed me, Alex. The only question is whether I let him do it quietly or make enough noise that the world pays attention. She slid a USB drive across the table. Everything's there. Bank records, communications, photographs. Enough to bury him and everyone who helped him. Alex pocketed the drive, but didn't break eye contact. And after? When this is over? The question hung between them, loaded with months of careful professional distance that had slowly, inevitably, become something more. Late nights reviewing documents had turned into long conversations about justice, about truth, about what they both wanted from lives that had been shaped by other people's cruelty. I don't know, Sienna admitted. For so long, I've been Mrs. Edward Cross. I'm not sure who Sienna is without him. I know who she is, Alex said quietly. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent electricity through her entire body, a reminder that she was still capable of feeling something other than anger and determination. She's brilliant. She's brave. She's been fighting a war by herself for months, and she's about to win. Sienna felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The first tears she'd allowed herself in years. What if I'm not strong enough? Then you lean on someone else for a while. His thumb traced across her knuckles. You don't have to do this alone anymore. For the first time since she'd discovered Edward's betrayals, Sienna felt something crack open in her chest. Not heartbreak this time, but something more dangerous, hope. The gala is tomorrow night, she said. I'll be there. Front row seat to watch you take down the king. And after? Alex smiled, and it transformed his entire face from serious journalist to the man who had slowly, carefully, helped her remember what trust felt like. After, we see if a phoenix and a truth-teller can build something real together. The morning of the anniversary gala, Sienna stood in her walk-in closet surrounded by 12 years of carefully curated armor. Gowns selected not for how they made her feel, but for how they made Edward look. Successful. Enviable. Untouchable. Today, she chose differently. The dress was midnight blue silk that moved like water, purchased 3 months ago when she first began planning Edward's destruction. It hugged her body like a second skin, confident and unapologetic. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see Edward Cross's wife. She saw herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Whatever happens tonight, you're not alone." The words wrapped around her heart like a warm embrace. Over the past months, their partnership had evolved from professional necessity to something that made her pulse quicken every time his name appeared on her screen. He challenged her, supported her, saw through the polished exterior to the woman who had been suffocating beneath it. Another text, this one from Marcus. *, everything's ready. The story goes live at midnight, right after you give the signal. *. Sienna closed her eyes and took a deep breath. By tomorrow morning, Edward's empire would be in ruins, his crimes exposed to the world. She would be free, but freedom came with a price. The society that had once embraced her would likely shun her. The life of luxury would be gone. The safety of Edward's protection, however hollow, would vanish. But when she thought of Alex, his laugh when she made a dry observation about the absurdity of high society, the way he listened to her ideas as if they mattered, the gentle touch of his hand when the weight of her plan seemed too heavy to bear, she knew she was trading up. The penthouse elevator chimed, and Edward's voice echoed through their marble foyer. He was home early, probably to ensure she looked appropriately adoring for their public performance. "Sienna." His voice carried that edge of impatience she knew so well. "We need to leave in 20 minutes. She found him in their bedroom, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror. Even now, with everything she knew about his cruelty, his betrayals, his crimes, Edward Cross cut an impressive figure. Tall, silver-haired, commanding. The kind of man who had never been told no, never been denied anything he wanted. Until tonight. "You look beautiful," he said, but his eyes were already moving past her to his phone, checking messages from his various mistresses, his corrupt contacts, his web of lies. "Thank you," Sienna replied, her voice carrying none of the warmth it had once held for this man. Edward finally looked at her. Really looked, and something flickered across his expression. Suspicion, maybe. Or recognition that the woman standing before him wasn't the same one who had stood at his altar 12 years ago, promising to love and honor him. "Are you feeling all right? You seem different." Different. Sienna almost laughed. She was different. She was awake. She was angry. She was in love with a man who saw her as an equal rather than an accessory. "I'm perfect, Edward," she said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his jacket with the same gentle touch she'd once given him out of genuine affection. Absolutely perfect. But as they rode to the gala in silence, Edward's hand possessive on her knee, Sienna felt the walls closing in. Every mile brought them closer to the moment when their marriage would explode in front of Manhattan's most powerful people. Every minute brought her closer to freedom, and to the terrifying possibility that she might finally, truly be happy. Her phone vibrated once. "Alex again. *, you've got this. See you on the other side. *. She deleted the message and smiled. The ballroom of the St. Regis glittered like a scene from a fairy tale, but Sienna felt like she was walking through a nightmare. Every face that turned toward her, and Edward carried a smile that didn't reach their eyes. Every conversation paused just long enough for her to notice the whispers. They knew. Somehow, some of them knew what was coming. "Darling, you're trembling," Edward murmured against her ear as they moved through the crowd. His hand on her back felt like a spider's touch. "Stage fright." "Something like that," Sienna replied, scanning the room for Alex. She found him near the bar, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that made her breath catch. He was speaking with Senator Williams, one of Edward's most powerful allies and, according to the evidence in her possession, one of his most corrupt. Their eyes met across the room, and Alex's slight nod told her everything she needed to know. The senator was nervous. The man who had taken millions in bribes from Edward was starting to sweat. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, "please welcome our hosts for this evening, Edward and Sienna Cross." Applause filled the ballroom as Edward led her to the podium. This was supposed to be their moment. 12 years of marriage, celebrated in front of everyone who mattered. Instead, it felt like walking to her execution. "Thank you all for being here," Edward began, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had never lost a battle. 12 years ago, I married the most beautiful woman in New York." More applause. Sienna smiled and played her part, the perfect wife basking in her husband's praise. "She's been my partner, my confidant, my greatest blessing." "Your greatest weapon," Sienna thought. "Your perfect alibi." "But tonight," Edward continued, and something in his tone made the crowd lean forward. "Tonight I have to share something that breaks my heart." Sienna's blood turned to ice. This wasn't part of the plan. Edward was supposed to make a toast, thank their guests, and then mingle for another hour before she gave Marcus the signal to release the story. "My wife," Edward said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "has betrayed not just me but all of you. She's been working with journalists, with my competitors, trying to destroy everything we've built together." The words hit her like a physical blow, but not because they were true. Because of what they meant. Edward knew. Somehow, he knew about Alex, about the evidence, about everything. But as the crowd gasped and whispered, as phones emerged to record her public humiliation, Sienna realized something that changed everything. Edward didn't know everything. He thought she was the victim in this story, the bitter wife trying to hurt him out of jealousy and spite. He had no idea that she had evidence of his crimes, his bribes, his murders. He thought her investigation was personal vendetta, not professional justice. Which meant he was about to hand her the perfect opportunity. "Pack your bags," he said, his voice cutting through her thoughts like a blade. And in that moment, Sienna understood that Edward Cross had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had publicly humiliated her in front of witnesses, given her cause for revenge that everyone in this room would understand. When his empire fell tomorrow, when his crimes were exposed, no one would question why his scorned wife had been the one to bring him down. "Of course, darling," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Whatever you say." As she walked toward the exit, Sienna caught Alex's eye one more time. He looked stricken, furious, ready to charge across the room and defend her honor. She shook her head almost imperceptibly and smiled, the same cold smile that had sent chills through the room. "Trust me," she mouthed. And then she was gone, leaving behind the glittering ballroom, the gasping crowd, and the man who had just signed his own death warrant. Sienna's penthouse had never felt more like a prison. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights blur through tears she finally allowed herself to shed. Below, the world continued spinning, oblivious to the fact that her life had just imploded in front of 300 witnesses. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters, former friends, business associates, all of them wanting a statement, a reaction, confirmation of the scandal that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. She had turned it off 2 hours ago, but the silence felt worse than the chaos. A soft knock at her door made her heart leap. "Alex." But when she opened it, Marcus stood in the hallway, his usually composed face etched with worry. "Where's Alex?" she asked immediately. "That's what I came to tell you." Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Edward's people got to him. Photos of you two together, evidence of your meetings. They're painting him as your co-conspirator, claiming he seduced you to get inside information about Edward's businesses." The words hit her like a physical blow. "They're destroying him." His editor pulled the story. "Says it's too compromised now, that no one will believe anything Alex writes about Edward. They've put him on administrative leave pending an investigation." Sienna sank onto her white leather sofa, the fight draining out of her. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful." "Sienna," Marcus said gently, sitting across from her. "There's more. Edward's filed for divorce. He's claiming adultery, emotional distress, theft of corporate secrets. His lawyers are seeking full forfeiture of assets, the penthouse, the Hamptons house, your trust fund, everything. They're painting you as a gold digger who betrayed him when she found someone else." "Let them," Sienna said quietly. "I never wanted his money. That's not the worst part." Marcus pulled a tablet from his briefcase, showing her a news article. "Look at the headline. Billionaire's wife caught in affair. Plan to destroy husband's empire." Below it was a photo of her and Alex at the cafe, their hands touching across the table. The intimacy of the moment, captured by a long-range lens, looked damning in black and white. "The story says you've been planning this for months. That you seduced a journalist to help you fabricate evidence against Edward. They're calling you manipulative, vindictive, possibly criminal." Sienna felt something die inside her chest. "And Alex? Professional pariah. No one will touch him now. Word is he's leaving New York." "Leaving?" The word came out as a whisper. Marcus nodded grimly. "Tonight. There's nothing left for him here." Sienna closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her failure settle over her like a shroud. She had been so careful, so methodical. She had planned for every contingency except the one that mattered most. That Edward would strike first, turning her moment of triumph into his victory. "What about the evidence?" she asked. "The real evidence? Worthless now. Edward's legal team will claim it's fabricated, that you and Alex worked together to frame him. With the adultery scandal, no prosecutor will touch the case. They'll say you have motive to lie. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Manhattan skyline, and the first drops of rain began to streak down her windows. How fitting. Even the weather was crying for her. There's one more thing, Marcus said softly. Alex left you a message. He handed her a sealed envelope. Her name was written across it in Alex's careful handwriting. The same hand that had once traced patterns on her skin, that had held hers when the weight of her plan seemed too heavy to bear. Inside, just a few lines. Asterisk Sienna. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect you from this. You deserved better than what he did to you tonight, and better than what I brought into your life. You're going to be okay. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Maybe someday, when this is over, we can find our way back to each other. Asterisk. Sienna let the letter fall from her numb fingers. Outside, the storm was growing stronger, lashing against her windows like an angry fist. She had lost everything. Her marriage, her reputation, her chance at justice, and the first man she had truly loved in years. Edward had won. Completely, devastatingly, finally. Or so it seemed. 3 weeks after the gala, Sienna sat in a downtown diner that smelled like coffee and broken dreams, picking at a piece of pie she couldn't taste. The media frenzy had died down, replaced by the next scandal, the next fallen socialite. She had become yesterday's news, exactly what Edward had counted on. You look like hell, said a familiar voice. Sienna looked up to find Diana Reeves sliding into the booth across from her. Diana, former federal prosecutor, current defense attorney, and the one person in New York who had never been impressed by Edward Cross. Thanks, Sienna said dryly. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear. Diana signaled the waitress for coffee, her sharp blue eyes studying Sienna's face. I heard about Alex Reed. Shame what happened to him. The mention of his name still felt like a knife between her ribs. Edward destroyed him, just like he destroys everyone who gets in his way. Maybe, or maybe Alex Reed is smarter than Edward thinks. Diana leaned forward, lowering her voice. Word is he's been freelancing for some interesting publications. Foreign papers. Ones that aren't impressed by Edward's legal threats. Sienna's pulse quickened. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the best way to win a war is to let your enemy think he's already won. Diana pulled out her phone, scrolling to a news article. This was published in the London Financial Times this morning. The headline made Sienna's breath catch. American billionaire's criminal empire exposed by insider documents. Below it, Alex's byline. He had copies, Sienna whispered. He had everything. Bank records, communications, photographs. The full investigation you two worked on together. And because it's published overseas, Edward can't use his American legal muscle to suppress it. Sienna's hands trembled as she scrolled through the article. Every detail was there, the charity fraud, the political bribes, the illegal pharmaceutical deals. Alex had managed to do what she thought was impossible. He had told the truth. There's more, Diana said. The FBI raided Edward's offices this morning. Seized everything. Turns out they've been building a case against him for months. And this article gave them the final push they needed. How do you know all this? Diana smiled, a predator's expression that reminded Sienna why she was one of the most feared lawyers in the city. Because they called me 2 hours ago. They want to make a deal. A deal? They need someone who understands Edward's business operations from the inside. Someone who can help them navigate his corporate structure, his offshore accounts, his network of corruption. Diana paused. Someone who has intimate knowledge of how he operates and is motivated to see justice done. Sienna felt something spark to life in her chest, something that had been dormant for weeks. You're talking about cooperation. I'm talking about revenge. Legal, sanctioned, devastating revenge. Diana leaned back in the booth. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. Witness protection if needed. And when it's over, Edward Cross will spend the rest of his life in federal prison while you walk away free. And Alex? What about him? Is he? Sienna struggled with the words. Is he coming back? Diana's expression softened slightly. That's not my area of expertise. But I can tell you this. The man who wrote that article, who risked his career to make sure your evidence saw the light of day, who found a way to protect you even from thousands of miles away. She stood up, tossing money on the table. That's a man worth fighting for. As Diana walked away, Sienna pulled out her phone and dialed a number she had memorized but never called. Alexander Reed, came the familiar voice, distant and crackling with international static. Alex, she whispered. It's me. A long pause. Then, Sienna. God, I've been hoping you'd call. I saw the article. I had to. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him destroy you and walk away clean. Tears she thought she'd run out of began falling again, but these felt different. Cleaner. Where are you? London. But not for long. I've been offered a position back in New York. Investigative unit for the Times. They want me to cover the cross trial. There's going to be a trial? Oh, Sienna. She could hear the smile in his voice. There's going to be the trial of the century. And when it's over, Edward Cross is going to pay for everything he's done. To you, to everyone. And us. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Another pause, longer this time. That depends. Are you ready to stop running? Sienna looked out the diner window at the Manhattan skyline. Edward's kingdom, built on lies and cruelty and the broken dreams of everyone who had trusted him. Soon it would all come crashing down, and she would be the one holding the sledgehammer. I'm ready, she said. 6 months later, Sienna stood outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, watching as Edward Cross was led away in handcuffs. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion, bribery, and fraud. 45 years to life, with no possibility of parole. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and bent senators to his will looked small and broken in his orange jumpsuit. As he was helped into the transport van, his eyes found hers through the crowd of reporters and protesters. For a moment, she saw not the monster who had humiliated her, betrayed her, tried to destroy her, but the man she had once loved enough to sacrifice her career for. The tragedy wasn't that he had become cruel. It was that the cruelty had always been there, hidden beneath charm and wealth and power. Sienna Cross, a reporter called out. How does it feel to see your husband convicted? Justice doesn't feel like victory, she said quietly. It feels like closure. The crowd began to disperse as the van pulled away, taking Edward toward a future of concrete walls and tasteless food, and the gradual realization that money couldn't buy freedom from the consequences of a lifetime of choices. Rough day. Sienna turned to find Alex beside her, looking impossibly handsome in his dark suit. 6 months of working together, first as cooperating witness and journalist, then as something more, had deepened the lines around his eyes but hadn't dimmed the warmth in them. Cathartic day, she corrected. How's the article coming? Almost done. The fall of an empire. How one woman's courage brought down America's most corrupt billionaire. He smiled. Pulitzer-worthy, I think. You're biased. Completely. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. Come on. Let's get out of here. They walked through the city streets as evening fell over Manhattan. The same streets where she had once moved through Edward's world like a ghost, invisible except when he needed her to play a role. Now she felt solid, real, present in her own life. I have something for you, Alex said as they reached Washington Square Park. Alex, we agreed. Not that kind of something. He pulled out a manila envelope. Job offer. The Times wants to start an investigative unit focused on white-collar crime. They want someone who understands how these financial empires work from the inside. Sienna stared at the envelope. They want me. They want the woman who single-handedly brought down one of the most powerful men in America. The woman who spent 18 months gathering evidence that prosecutors are calling the most comprehensive financial crime documentation they've ever seen. He pressed the envelope into her hands. They want Sienna Martinez. Her maiden name. Her real name. The name of the forensic accountant who had once believed that numbers could reveal truth, who had given up that belief for love, who had found her way back to it through justice. What do you think? Alex asked. Instead of answering, she kissed him. Right there in Washington Square Park, with the autumn leaves falling around them and the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. This kiss was different from their first, no longer desperate or hidden or stolen. This kiss tasted like freedom. I think, she said when they broke apart, that it's time to stop being someone else's wife and start being myself. Alex smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. And us. We build something real. Something true. Something that can't be bought or sold or destroyed by someone else's cruelty. As they walked toward their future together, Sienna felt the last pieces of her old life fall away like shed skin. Mrs. Edward Cross was dead, buried beneath 12 years of lies and compromise and silent suffering. But Sienna Martinez was very much alive, and she had work to do. 1 year later, Sienna stood in the newsroom of the New York Times, surrounded by monitors displaying the financial records of a pharmaceutical company that had been price gouging cancer patients. Her investigative unit had already taken down 2 corrupt politicians and a defense contractor who had been billing the government for non-existent services. "Martinez," her editor called out. "Great work on the Morrison Industries piece. The SEC is opening a formal investigation." She looked up from her computer, where she was cross-referencing bank transfers with campaign contributions, following the money trail that would inevitably lead to more truth, more justice, more closure for the victims of powerful men who thought themselves above the law. "Thank you," she said, but her attention was already returning to the numbers on her screen. Numbers that told stories, revealed secrets, demanded accountability. "Working late again?" Alex appeared beside her desk, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the slightly rumpled look of a man who had spent the day chasing down sources for his latest exposé. "The Morrison CEO has been funneling money through the same Cayman Islands bank that Edward used. I want to make sure we have everything before we publish." Alex set her coffee down and kissed the top of her head, a casual gesture of affection that still sent warmth through her entire body. "Edward's been transferred to maximum security," he said quietly. "Appeals court rejected his petition for reduced sentence." Sienna paused in her typing. She thought of Edward less and less these days, but when she did, it was with a kind of distant sadness. Not for what he had become, but for what he might have been if he had chosen differently. "Good," she said simply. "Any regrets?" Alex asked, settling into the chair beside her desk. It was a question he had asked before, usually late at night when they were tangled together in the bed of the Brooklyn brownstone they shared. A modest place compared to her former penthouse, but filled with a warmth that all of Edward's money could never have bought. "About Edward? About the empire? About the life I gave up? About any of it?" Sienna looked around the newsroom, at the journalists working late to meet deadlines, at the cork boards covered with leads and connections and evidence, at the mission statement hanging on the wall that read "Democracy dies in darkness." This was her world now. These were her people. This was her purpose. "The only thing I regret," she said, turning back to Alex, "is waiting so long to remember who I really was." He smiled, and she saw in his eyes the same thing she felt in her heart, not just love, but partnership. Equality. The kind of relationship built on mutual respect and shared values rather than power and control. "What do you say we finish this tomorrow?" he said, gesturing at her computer. "I know a place that serves excellent wine and mediocre pasta." "Is this you asking me on a date, Mr. Reed?" "This is me asking the woman I love to have dinner with me," he said, standing and offering her his hand. "The woman who brought down a billionaire, started a new career, and somehow still makes time to love me back." Sienna saved her work and took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. As they walked toward the elevator, she caught a glimpse of herself in the dark office windows. No longer the polished trophy wife or the broken woman leaving a ballroom in disgrace, but someone new. Someone whole. Someone who had learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction, but transformation. That the truest victory wasn't over someone else, but over the parts of yourself that had accepted less than you deserved. The elevator doors closed, and they descended toward the street level, toward dinner and wine and the quiet joy of a love story that had been worth fighting for. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the darkness. The same city where her old life had ended, where her new life had begun, where justice and love had proven stronger than money and power. Where a woman named Sienna Martinez had remembered that some things, truth, integrity, real love, could never be bought or sold or taken away. They could only be chosen, again and again, one decision at a time. Asterisk, what would you have done in their place? Tell us your favorite love story in the comments. Hit the like button if you believe in love and justice. Asterisk.